The first thing I noticed wasn't the music or the flowers. It was the silence where my name should have been. I stood just inside the marble entrance of the ballroom, clutching the invitation like it might explain why no one had come to greet me. Gold lettering, thick cream paper, my cousin's wedding, high society, everyone said. The kind of event where people practiced smiling in mirrors and learned how to hold champagne glasses like they were born with them. I had practiced my smile too. Inside, crystal chandeliers spilled warm light over long tables dressed in ivory linen. Laughter floated easily, the kind that assumes it belongs. Waiters moved like choreography. Everyone looked like they knew exactly where to stand, who to speak to, what mattered. Everyone except me. I scanned the room for a familiar face. My aunt, my uncle, even my cousin. The bride, but conversations closed as I approached, like doors gently but firmly shut. No one was rude. That was the strangest part. They simply forgot to include me, forgotten without cruelty, forgotten with precision. I told myself not to be sensitive. I always did. Growing up, I'd been the easy one. The cousin who didn't ask for much. The girl who listened more than she spoke, who laughed when spoken over, who believed patience was the same thing as kindness. I had learned early that if you didn't demand space, people felt comfortable shrinking you. I found my seat after wandering far too long. It was tucked near the back, close to the service corridor, no name card, just an empty chair someone had eventually pointed to with a polite gesture and a glance away. "It's fine," I whispered to no one. From where I sat, I could see everything clearly, my cousin gliding from table to table in a dress that shimmered like confidence. Her new husband, now CEO of something impressive and expensive, standing tall beside her, laughter booming, hand always resting possessively at her back. He looked like a man used to rooms bending toward him. I felt proud of her, I really did. But there was a small aching space in my chest that hurt in a way I didn't yet have words for. The ceremony ended, applause rose, music swelled, and dinner began. Plates arrived at my table last. My water glass stayed empty until I flagged someone down twice. Each small oversight stacked quietly on top of the last, like a tower no one else could see. Then came the toasts. The CEO stood to speak. His voice carried easily, confident and polished. He thanked the investors, the mentors, the people who mattered. He made jokes about loyalty and family, about knowing who stands with you when success arrives. People laughed. I smiled. When he finally noticed me, it was accidental. A glance in my direction, curious. Then dismissive. "Can someone ask her to move?" he said lightly, gesturing toward me without looking. "She's blocking the view." The words weren't cruel, that almost made them worse. A waiter leaned toward me, apologetic. "Miss, if you could, it's okay," I said quickly, already standing. I moved my chair back an inch. 2 inches, enough. I could feel eyes on me, assessing, then losing interest. I sat back down, heat climbing my neck. No one asked my name. No one checked if I was all right. I told myself it was just a misunderstanding. I told myself not to make a scene. I told myself that love meant staying quiet. But as the music resumed and conversations bloomed again, something shifted inside me, soft but unmistakable. I realized no one had meant to hurt me. They just hadn't thought about me at all. And for the first time, I wondered when I had taught them that was acceptable. I sat there, hands folded in my lap, listening, watching, letting the truth reveal itself slowly, the way it always does when you stop filling the silence with excuses. The night was beautiful, the people were happy, and I had never felt more alone in a room full of family. That was the moment I understood this wasn't about a seat. It was about everything I had quietly given up to keep the peace. If Chapter 1 was about being unseen, Chapter 2 was about being observed carefully, selectively, and only when I was useful. The evening unfolded in layers. After dinner, the lights dimmed slightly, and the band shifted into something softer, more intimate. People stood, drifted, formed new circles, glasses clinked, laughter loosened. From my seat near the edge, I watched the room rearrange itself the way it always had around power, around money, around whoever spoke the loudest. I noticed how often my cousin's smile flickered when she thought no one was looking. She hugged guests, accepted compliments, nodded graciously. But her eyes kept darting toward her husband, measuring his reactions, adjusting herself to match his mood. I had seen that look before, not fear, anticipation, the kind that comes from knowing love has conditions even if no one ever says them out loud. At one point, she came toward me. My heart lifted in a small, embarrassing way. "There you are," she said, breathless, as if she'd been searching. She leaned in for a quick hug that didn't quite land. "You're okay, right? Yes," I said, "always yes." She glanced over her shoulder. "Good. I might need you later." The words were casual but familiar. I had been needed like that my whole life, not for who I was, but for what I didn't demand. Emotional backup. Silent support, the one who absorbed discomfort so others wouldn't have to. Before I could respond, she was pulled away by another guest. I stood there holding the shape of her absence, trying not to read too much into it. I drifted toward the balcony for air. From there, I could hear fragments of conversations below me, business deals disguised as compliments, family praise laced with expectations. Someone mentioned keeping things in the family. Someone else laughed and said, "Well, some people know their place." I didn't know if that last part was about me. What I did know was that no one came looking when I stayed gone. Later, when I returned inside, I passed a small cluster near the bar, my aunt, my uncle, and the CEO host. They didn't notice me at first. I slowed, not intending to eavesdrop, but unable to walk past. "She's harmless," and my aunt was saying. "Always has been. She won't cause trouble." "Good," he replied. "We don't need complications, especially not tonight." They laughed. Not unkindly, comfortably. Something inside me tightened, then went strangely calm. They weren't plotting against me. That was the painful part. They were categorizing me, placing me neatly into a box labeled manageable. The betrayal wasn't dramatic. It was efficient. I stepped forward then, not to interrupt, but because it felt wrong to remain invisible while standing 3 feet away. My heel clicked softly against the floor. They turned. Surprise flickered across their faces, followed quickly by relief when they saw it was just me. "There you are," my uncle said, "enjoying yourself." "Yes," I said again. The CEO nodded at me, already distracted. "Good. Could you do me a favor?" He spoke as though it were natural, expected. "Let the coordinator know we'll need an extra car later, and tell her to make it discreet." I hesitated, not because the task was difficult, but because no one had asked if I was willing. I realized then how often my silence had been mistaken for consent. "I'll see what I can do," I said carefully. He smiled, satisfied, and turned back to the others before I finished speaking. As I walked away, the weight of something long, carried began to press on me. Every time I had smoothed over tension, swallowed hurt, agreed without question. Every time I had been the bridge, so others wouldn't have to cross uncomfortable ground, I stopped near the edge of the dance floor. The music swelled, couples moving in slow, graceful patterns. I watched my cousin laugh at something her husband whispered, her hand tightening around his arm just a second too long. That was when the truth settled fully in me, heavy but clear. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as convenience. And for the first time, I didn't rush to excuse them. I didn't confront them either. I simply stood there, breathing, letting the pain exist without trying to fix it. Silence, I was beginning to understand, could be more revealing than any argument, and mine was finally starting to speak. There is a strange clarity that arrives when you stop trying to be understood. I felt it settle over me as the night moved on, gentle but steady, like a tide that no longer asks permission. I sat again, this time not searching the room for recognition, not rehearsing explanations in my head. I simply watched. And in that watching, patterns I had ignored for years began to sharpen into focus. People spoke over me because I allowed them to finish my sentences in my silence. They made decisions around me because I had taught them I would adapt. They assumed my agreement because I had confused endurance with loyalty. None of this had happened suddenly. That was the hardest truth to accept. Across the room, the CEO host raised his glass again, pulling attention effortlessly. Someone adjusted the music at his signal. Someone else laughed too loudly at a joke that wasn't funny. The room responded to him the way water responds to weight. I realized then that power didn't always announce itself with cruelty. Sometimes it arrived wrapped in charm, in politeness, in confidence so unquestioned it felt like gravity. My cousin approached me once more, this time alone. Her smile was practiced, but her eyes searched mine, cautious now. "He can be a bit direct," she said quietly, nodding toward her husband. "I hope you're not taking anything personally." I studied her face. The girl I'd shared secrets with as children was still there, somewhere behind the flawless makeup and measured words. I saw exhaustion flicker beneath the surface. I saw fear disguised as success. "I'm not," I said, and for the first time it was completely true. She exhaled, relief softening her shoulders. "Good, you've always been so understanding." There it was again. The compliment that was never meant to honor me, only to reassure her. She squeezed my hand briefly, then drifted back into the crowd. I didn't follow. Instead, I stayed where I was and let memory do its quiet work. I remembered being the one asked to apologize first, even when I hadn't been wrong. The one asked to wait, to bend, to compromise because you're stronger. The one praised for being low maintenance, which really meant low resistance. For years, I had worn that role like a badge. Tonight, it felt like a cage. The band slowed the tempo, and something shifted in the air. The CEO stepped closer to the dance floor, gesturing animatedly, speaking over the music to someone beside him. He caught my eye then briefly, as if noticing a piece of furniture out of place. "Could you move again?" he asked, smiling. "We're about to do something special." The words landed softly, almost kindly, and that was when I understood the moment wasn't asking for anger. It was asking for presence. I didn't rush. I didn't shrink. I simply stood, turned toward him fully, and waited until he finished speaking. The music kept playing, but my stillness created a pause of its own. "I'm not in the way," I said calmly. My voice didn't tremble. "But if you need space, you can ask the coordinator. That's her role." A few people nearby glanced over. The smile on his face faltered not from embarrassment, but from surprise. He hadn't expected resistance dressed so gently. There was no apology from him, no explanation from me. I held his gaze just long enough to make it clear I was not asking permission to exist. Then I sat back down. The moment passed, the music swelled again, conversations resumed, but something had shifted subtly, irreversibly. No one spoke over me after that, not because I had demanded respect, but because I had stopped offering myself as optional. I felt no rush of victory, no satisfaction, just a quiet steadiness, like setting something heavy down after carrying it for too long. I realized then that silence, when chosen, is not weakness. It is restraint, it is clarity. It is a boundary you don't need to explain. And in that boundary, I finally felt the beginning of peace. The night continued. but I was no longer waiting for it to include me. I was already whole. The night didn't end with applause or confrontation. It ended the way most real turning points do, quietly, without witnesses, and with a strange sense of relief I hadn't expected. I stayed until the final song faded and the crowd began to thin. Chairs scraped softly against marble floors. Laughter softened into tired goodbyes. The room that had once felt overwhelming slowly returned to something human-sized. No one stopped me as I stood to leave. That, too, felt important. I slipped my coat on near the exit, fingers moving slowly, deliberately. My reflection in the mirror startled me, not because I looked different, but because I didn't look apologetic. For once, my shoulders weren't drawn inward. My eyes didn't scan for approval. I looked settled. My cousin found me then, just as I reached for the door. Her dress was still flawless, but the energy around her had shifted. The night had been heavy for her in ways I suspected she wouldn't name yet. "You're leaving already?" she asked. "Yes," I said gently. She hesitated. "I hope you know none of it was meant to hurt you." I believed her. "That was the tragedy of it, I know," I replied. "That doesn't mean it didn't." The words weren't sharp. They didn't need to be. She swallowed, nodding slowly. For the first time all evening, she didn't try to smooth the moment away. She didn't ask me to understand more. She simply let the truth sit between us. "I've always admired how strong you are," she said finally. I smiled, soft but certain. "I'm learning a different kind of strength now." She watched me go, and I didn't look back. Outside, the night air was cool and steady. The city hummed in the distance, indifferent to weddings and power, and who mattered inside glittering rooms. I stood there for a moment, breathing, letting the quiet wrap around me. I thought about all the years I had mistaken belonging for endurance, about how often I had stayed silent not because I was peaceful, but because I was afraid that speaking would cost me love. What I had learned standing unnoticed in a room full of family was that love that requires your disappearance is not love you need to fight to keep. In the weeks that followed, the consequences arrived without drama. Invitations became less frequent. Group messages grew quieter. No one asked me to help smooth things over anymore. I noticed how rarely anyone checked in unless there was something to gain. And instead of hurting, it felt clean. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't explain myself. I didn't demand acknowledgement. I simply stopped volunteering for roles that shrank me. The space that created filled slowly, with better friendships, deeper conversations, and a peace that didn't depend on being liked. Once, months later, I ran into my cousin alone. No lights, no audience. She looked tired, but honest. "You seem lighter," she said. "I am," I replied. She nodded, as if filing the truth away for later. I realized then that emotional justice doesn't always look like being proven right. Sometimes it looks like being free. Free from the need to be agreeable. Free from explaining your worth. Free from rooms that only notice you when you're convenient. I had entered that wedding as the forgotten cousin, the one who blended into the background, grateful for scraps of attention. I left as someone who knew exactly where she stood, not above anyone, not below anyone, just firmly, finally, within herself. And that was enough. Life lesson: you don't teach people how to respect you by demanding it loudly. You teach them by deciding, quietly, what you will no longer accept, and walking away with dignity when the answer is clear. Some doors close softly behind you, and the peace on the other side makes every step worth it.